In the heart of Ridgeview, a bustling city known for its vibrant neighborhoods and strong community spirit, an incident unfolded that would shake the very foundation of trust between the police and the people they swore to protect. It all started on a chilly evening in late October, when tensions were already running high due to years of simmering resentment between law enforcement and certain segments of the population. That night, a call came in about a disturbance at a local bar. A seasoned detective with a reputation for being tough but sometimes overstepping boundaries was dispatched to handle the situation. This officer had been on the force for over a decade and was no stranger to difficult cases. But lately, he'd been feeling the weight of the job, long hours, mounting pressure, and the constant scrutiny from both the public and his superiors. He wasn't in the best headspace, though few around him realized it. When he arrived at the scene, things seemed routine at first. There was a small crowd outside the bar, and one man stood out, calm but firm, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. The man turned out to be a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. He was well known in the area for taking on controversial lawsuits against institutions accused of wrongdoing. On this particular night, he had been enjoying a drink with friends when the argument broke out, and now he found himself caught up in the chaos. As the detective approached, the lawyer began questioning his authority, pointing out inconsistencies in how similar incidents were handled elsewhere. Witnesses later recounted that the lawyer's tone wasn't aggressive. It was more like he was challenging the officer's decisions, trying to hold him accountable right then and there. For most officers, this might have been brushed off as part of the job. But for this detective, it felt personal. Maybe it was because he'd heard comments like these before, or maybe it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Whatever, the reason something snapped. What happened next shocked everyone present. In a sudden burst of anger, the detective lost control. Instead of diffusing the situation, he lashed out physically, punching and kicking the lawyer until he collapsed to the ground. Bystanders gasped in disbelief, some shouting for him to stop, while others scrambled to record the altercation on their phones. By the time backup arrived, the damage was done, not just to the lawyer who lay bruised and bloodied, but to the fragile relationship between the police department and the community. Unbeknownst to the detective, those recordings would spread like wildfire. Within hours, videos of the assault went viral online, sparking outrage far beyond Ridgeview. Social media lit up with hashtags demanding justice, and news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the voices calling for accountability. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. A sworn officer of the law using excessive force against someone who was unarmed and posed no immediate threat. The lawyer, still recovering from his injuries, became an unlikely symbol of resistance. His calm demeanor during interviews struck a chord with viewers, making the injustice even harder to ignore. He spoke passionately about the need for systemic change, not just punishment for one rogue officer. His words resonated deeply, especially among communities that had long felt marginalized by law enforcement. Back in Ridgeview, the fallout was immediate and intense. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some demanded the detective's resignation, while others called for broader reforms within the department. Local leaders scrambled to address the growing unrest, promising transparency and swift action, but promises weren't enough to quell the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Word of the incident eventually reached federal authorities, prompting the Department of Justice, DOJ, to step in. What started as a single act of misconduct quickly spiraled into a full-blown investigation, not just into the detective's actions, but into the entire police force. Questions swirled about whether this was an isolated case or symptomatic of deeper issues within the department. Was this really about one bad apple, or did the barrel itself need cleaning? For the residents of Ridgeview, this marked the beginning of a long and painful reckoning. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And as the DOJ agents descended upon the city, armed with questions and subpoenas, it became clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The stage was set for a battle that would test the limits of accountability, fairness, and the possibility of redemption for both individuals and institutions. This opening chapter of Ridgeview's story is one of raw emotion, human frailty, and the power of collective voices demanding change. It sets the tone for a journey filled with challenges, revelations, and ultimately, hope. Because even in the darkest moments, there lies an opportunity to confront the truth and strive for something better. The aftermath of the incident hit Ridgeview like a tidal wave, shaking the city to its core. The video of the detective's violent outburst had gone viral, and within days, it felt like the entire world was watching. Social media was flooded with reactions. Some people expressed shock, others shared stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, and a few even defended the officer, claiming he was under immense pressure. But for most residents of Ridgeview, this wasn't just another news story. It was personal. It was their community, their police department, and now, their fight for justice. At the center of the storm was the police chief, a woman who had spent decades climbing the ranks of law enforcement. She had always prided herself on running a tight ship, but now she found herself facing questions she couldn't easily answer. Reporters camped outside her office, demanding statements. Protesters gathered daily in front of the police station, holding signs that read, "Accountability now and justice for all." Even her own officers seemed divided, unsure whether to defend their colleague or distance themselves from his actions. The pressure was mounting, and cracks were beginning to show. In an attempt to regain control of the narrative, the chief suspended the detective involved without pay. She held a press conference, standing behind a podium with the department's seal prominently displayed. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd, promising transparency and accountability. "What happened that night does not reflect the values of this department," she said firmly. "We are committed to ensuring that justice is served." But her words rang hollow to many. For years, there had been whispers about misconduct within the force, cases swept under the rug, complaints ignored, and victims silenced. Now those whispers had turned into shouts, echoing through the streets of Ridgeview. People weren't just angry about what they saw in the video. They were angry about everything they felt had been overlooked for far too long. The lawyer at the center of the incident became an unexpected leader in the movement for change. Though still recovering from his injuries, he refused to stay silent. He gave interviews, attended rallies, and worked tirelessly to amplify the voices of those who had suffered at the hands of law enforcement. His calm demeanor and sharp intellect made him a powerful advocate, and soon, national organizations began reaching out to offer their support. Together, they filed a lawsuit against both the detective and the police department, alleging excessive use of force and systemic negligence. As the legal battle unfolded, protests continued to grow. What started as a small group of demonstrators quickly turned into massive gatherings, drawing people from all walks of life. Families brought their children, teachers marched alongside students, and retirees joined the younger generation in calling for reform. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, anger, frustration, but also hope. Music played, speeches inspired, and chants echoed through the streets. No justice, no peace. Protect us from those who swear to protect. Inside the police department, morale plummeted. Officers who once considered themselves part of a tight-knit family now found themselves questioning where they stood. Some defended the detective, arguing that the stress of the job sometimes pushed people to their limits. Others quietly admitted they were worried about what might come next. Conversations around the water cooler grew tense, and trust between colleagues began to erode. For many officers, it wasn't just about one bad decision, it was about the fear of being judged for the actions of someone else. The divide wasn't limited to the police force. Within the community, opinions were just as polarized. Some residents believed the detective deserved punishment, but worried that targeting one person wouldn't fix the bigger issues. Others felt that nothing short of a complete overhaul of the department would suffice. Debates raged at coffee shops, grocery stores, and dinner tables, with emotions running high on both sides. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice, DOJ, announced it would launch a full-scale investigation into the Ridgeview Police Department. This news sent shockwaves through the city. Federal agents arrived armed with subpoenas and warrants, ready to dig deep into the department's history. They requested years' worth of documents, including internal memos, disciplinary records, and body camera footage. Officers were called in for interviews one by one to explain their roles in past incidents. The process was exhaustive, invasive, and deeply unsettling for everyone involved. For the chief, this was a nightmare scenario. Every decision she had ever made was now under scrutiny. Past compromises, moments of hesitation, and choices made out of convenience suddenly loomed large. She tried to maintain a brave face, assuring the public that the department would cooperate fully with the investigation. But privately, she wrestled with guilt and regret. Had she turned a blind eye to warning signs? Could she have done more to prevent this crisis? These questions haunted her day and night. As the investigation progressed, tensions in Ridgeview reached a boiling point. Protesters clashed with counter-protesters, each side accusing the other of being unreasonable. Local businesses struggled to stay open amid the chaos, and some residents reported feeling unsafe leaving their homes. The city council held emergency meetings, debating how to restore order while addressing legitimate concerns about police misconduct. It was clear that Ridgeview was at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming weeks would shape its future for years to come. Despite the turmoil, there were glimpses of hope. Community leaders organized town hall meetings, inviting residents to share their stories and propose solutions. Activists worked with local schools to educate students about civic engagement and the importance of speaking up against injustice. And slowly but surely, conversations began to shift, from anger and blame to understanding and collaboration. It wasn't easy, and progress was slow, but it was a start. By the time the DOJ wrapped up its initial phase of the investigation, Ridgeview had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Trust between the police and the community was fractured, but not beyond repair. People were talking, not just about what had gone wrong, but about how to make things right. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a while, there was a sense that real change might be possible. This chapter of Ridgeview's story is one of struggle, division, and resilience. It captures the raw emotions of a community grappling with its flaws while striving for something better. It's messy, imperfect, and deeply human, a reflection of the challenges we all face when trying to build a fairer, more just society. The arrival of the Department of Justice (DOJ) investigators in Ridgeview felt like a storm rolling into a quiet town. For weeks, rumors had swirled about what they would find, but when federal agents finally descended on the city, it was clear this wasn't going to be a quick or easy process. They came with stacks of papers, laptops, and an unshakable determination to get to the truth. The air buzzed with anticipation. What secrets would come to light? And more importantly, who would be held accountable? From day one, the investigation sent shockwaves through the police department. Officers were summoned for interviews, some nervously fidgeting as they sat across from stern-faced agents asking pointed questions. Can you explain this report? Why does your statement differ from the body cam footage? What exactly happened here? These weren't casual chats. They were interrogations designed to uncover inconsistencies and hidden truths. Every answer mattered. Every detail counted. Some officers walked out visibly shaken, while others tried to brush it off, insisting they had nothing to hide. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to show, not just in individual stories, but in the entire system. Investigators uncovered troubling patterns. Cases where complaints against officers mysteriously disappeared, reports that seemed altered to favor law enforcement, and instances where evidence pointed to misconduct yet resulted in no consequences. It became increasingly clear that the issues went far beyond one rogue detective. This wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about a culture that allowed such decisions to happen without repercussion. One of the biggest bombshells came when a junior officer decided to speak up. He'd been with the force for only a few years, idealistic when he started, but disillusioned by what he saw behind the scenes. Sitting down with DOJ investigators, He revealed how senior members of the department pressured rookies to meet arrest quotas, regardless of whether charges stuck. It didn't matter if someone was guilty or not, he explained, his voice trembling. If we didn't bring in enough arrests, we got reprimanded. People started cutting corners just to survive. His testimony opened the floodgates. Other officers, emboldened by his courage, began sharing their own experiences. One recounted how he was told to plant drugs on a suspect because it'll make the case stronger. Another described being forced to falsify a report to protect a colleague. Each story painted a grim picture of a system riddled with corruption, fear, and silence. What made it worse was that these practices weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern stretching back years. As the DOJ dug deeper, they discovered something even more alarming. Encrypted messages exchanged between high-ranking officials discussing ways to cover up misconduct. These weren't casual conversations. They were deliberate attempts to manipulate outcomes and shield the department from scrutiny. Among those implicated was none other than the police chief herself. Her involvement shattered whatever credibility she had left. Suddenly, her earlier promises of transparency and accountability sounded hollow, almost mocking. For the residents of Ridgeview, this revelation was devastating. Many had looked to the chief as a stabilizing force during the chaos, hoping she could steer the department toward reform. But now it seemed she had been part of the problem all along. Trust, already fragile, crumbled further. Protesters took to the streets again, chanting slogans like "No More Lies" and "Clean House." Even those who had initially defended the police department struggled to justify what was coming to light. Meanwhile, the lawyer at the center of the original incident continued to play a pivotal role in pushing for change. With support from national organizations, he worked tirelessly to draft policies aimed at preventing similar abuses in the future. His focus wasn't solely on punishing wrongdoers. He wanted systemic reforms that would address the root causes of misconduct. He advocated for independent oversight boards, mandatory de-escalation training, and stricter disciplinary measures for officers who crossed the line. His efforts earned him both praise and criticism. Some hailed him as a hero fighting for justice, while others accused him of being too lenient, arguing that real change required harsher penalties. Back at the police station, morale hit rock bottom. Officers who once prided themselves on their work now felt like they were under constant suspicion. Some resented the scrutiny, convinced they were being unfairly judged for the actions of a few bad apples. Others quietly acknowledged that the investigation was long overdue, admitting among themselves that things needed to change. Conversations grew tense, friendships strained, and the camaraderie that once defined the force began to fade. The community's response was equally divided. At town hall meetings, emotions ran high as residents debated the best path forward. Some argued for sweeping reforms, including defunding the police and reallocating resources to social services. Others pushed back, worried that drastic measures might leave the city vulnerable to crime. Teachers, parents, business owners, and students all weighed in, each bringing their unique perspective to the table. Despite the disagreements, one thing was clear: people cared deeply about what happened next. They wanted answers, accountability, and most importantly, a plan to ensure this never happened again. By the time the DOJ wrapped up its initial findings, Ridgeview was a city transformed. The investigation had exposed deep-seated issues that couldn't be ignored any longer. Arrests based on flimsy evidence, racial profiling, and retaliation against whistleblowers, these weren't just isolated mistakes. They were symptoms of a broken system. Federal monitors were appointed to oversee reforms, ensuring that changes weren't just promised, but implemented. For many, this marked the beginning of a painful but necessary healing process. Yet, even as the dust began to settle, questions lingered. Would the reforms stick, or would old habits creep back in once the spotlight faded? Could trust between the police and the community ever truly be rebuilt? And perhaps most importantly, would the sacrifices made by whistleblowers and activists lead to lasting change or simply serve as another chapter in a cycle of failure and redemption? This phase of Ridgeview's story is one of reckoning and revelation. It captures the raw complexity of confronting uncomfortable truths while striving for a better future. It's messy, emotional, and deeply human, a reminder that progress often comes at a cost, but it's a cost worth paying if it means moving closer to justice. As the DOJ investigation continued to unfold, Ridgeview found itself teetering on the edge of a reckoning. The deeper federal agents dug, the more unsettling truths emerged, each revelation chipping away at whatever remained of the city's trust in its police department. For weeks, investigators combed through years' worth of records, dashcam footage, body camera videos, internal memos, disciplinary files, all while interviewing officers, whistleblowers, and community members. What they uncovered painted a picture that was hard to ignore, a pattern of misconduct so deeply entrenched it seemed almost impossible to dismantle. One of the most shocking discoveries came from a mid-level officer who finally decided he couldn't stay silent any longer. This man had spent nearly 2 decades on the force, rising through the ranks and earning respect for his dedication. But behind closed doors, he had watched as unethical practices became normalized. During his interview with the DOJ, he revealed how senior leadership pressured subordinates to meet arrest quotas, often targeting low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. It wasn't about solving crimes or keeping people safe, he said, his voice heavy with regret. It was about numbers. If you didn't bring in enough arrests, you were labeled weak or ineffective. So people started making arrests just to hit their targets, even if it meant bending the rules. His words resonated deeply with others in the department who had long harbored similar frustrations but feared speaking out. Slowly, more officers began coming forward, sharing stories that corroborated his account. One recounted being instructed to falsify evidence to secure convictions. Another admitted to planting contraband during searches, and yet another described how supervisors routinely ignored complaints from citizens. Each confession added another layer to the grim narrative, a system designed not to protect and serve but to maintain control at all costs. But perhaps the most explosive discovery came when investigators stumbled upon a series of encrypted messages exchanged between high-ranking officials within the department. These weren't casual conversations. They were deliberate attempts to cover up misconduct and suppress damaging information. In one exchange, a senior administrator outlined strategies for dismissing citizen complaints without proper review. In another, plans were discussed to alter reports to align with official narratives. And then there was the involvement of the police chief herself. Her name appeared repeatedly in these threads, implicating her in efforts to downplay allegations of wrongdoing and shield problematic officers from accountability. When this evidence came to light, it sent shockwaves through Ridgeview. Residents who had once looked to the chief as a stabilizing figure now saw her as complicit in the very issues they were fighting against. Protesters gathered outside her office, demanding her resignation. Local leaders called emergency meetings to discuss next steps. Even some officers within the department expressed relief that she might finally be held accountable, though they worried about what her departure would mean for morale. Under mounting pressure, the chief stepped down. Her resignation letter was terse, offering little explanation beyond acknowledging that the department needed new leadership to move forward. While some viewed her exit as a victory, others saw it as too little, too late. After all, removing one person wouldn't erase years of systemic failures. Still, her departure marked a turning point, a symbolic step toward accountability and reform. Taking her place was a reform-minded captain who had spent much of her career advocating for transparency and accountability within law enforcement. She wasted no time implementing changes, starting with the termination of several officers implicated in the DOJ investigation. Their dismissals were met with mixed reactions. Some cheered the move as a necessary step toward justice, while others argued it didn't go far enough. "Firing a few bad apples won't fix the barrel," one protester shouted during a rally. "We need to overhaul the whole system." The new leader also established a task force dedicated to rebuilding trust between the police and the community. Comprised of officers, activists, educators, and residents, the group met regularly to discuss ways to improve relations. They proposed initiatives like hosting monthly town halls where citizens could voice concerns directly to law enforcement, launching mentorship programs connecting officers with local youth, and creating an independent oversight board to review complaints against the department. While these ideas sounded promising, many wondered whether they would actually lead to meaningful change, or simply fade into obscurity, like so many promises before them. Meanwhile, the lawyer at the center of the original incident remained a driving force behind the push for reform. With support from national organizations, he helped draft legislation aimed at preventing similar abuses nationwide. His focus wasn't solely on punishing wrongdoers. He wanted to address the root causes of misconduct. He advocated for mandatory de-escalation training, stricter guidelines for use of force incidents, and greater transparency in how complaints were handled. His efforts earned him both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed him as a hero fighting for justice, while detractors accused him of being too soft, arguing that real change required harsher penalties for those involved in corruption. For the residents of Ridgeview, this period was one of uncertainty and hope. On one hand, the revelations unearthed by the DOJ investigation were painful reminders of how broken the system truly was. On the other hand, the reforms being proposed offered a glimmer of possibility, a chance to build something better. People debated passionately at town hall meetings, sharing their fears, frustrations, and dreams for the future. Teachers talked about wanting safer schools. Parents expressed concerns about raising children in a divided city, and business owners voiced worries about maintaining stability amid ongoing protests. Despite their differences, everyone agreed on one thing: Ridgeview couldn't go back to the way things were. Even as progress inched forward, challenges persisted. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some officers resisted new policies, claiming they made their jobs harder. Others openly criticized the reforms, warning that increased oversight would discourage good candidates from joining the force. Skeptics questioned whether the DOJ monitors appointed to oversee implementation would actually hold the department accountable, or if they'd eventually leave, allowing old habits to creep back in. Yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of connection. Officers began participating in community events, playing basketball with kids at local parks and serving meals at shelters. Activists worked alongside educators to teach students about civic engagement and the importance of holding institutions accountable. And slowly, painfully, relationships began to mend. Not completely, but enough to remind everyone that healing was possible. This phase of Ridgeview's story is one of truth and transformation. It captures the raw complexity of confronting uncomfortable realities while striving for a better future. It's messy, emotional, and deeply human. A testament to the resilience of a community determined to rise above its flaws and create something stronger. Because even in the darkest moments, there lies an opportunity to confront the past, learn from it, and take bold steps toward change. The months following the DOJ's findings were a whirlwind of activity in Ridgeview. The city, once known for its quiet charm and tight-knit neighborhoods, had become ground zero for a national conversation about policing, accountability, and justice. The reforms proposed by the new police captain and supported by activists like the lawyer at the center of the original incident brought both hope and resistance. It was messy, emotional, and often frustrating, but it was also a chance to rebuild trust in ways that felt almost impossible just months earlier. One of the first major changes implemented was mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. This wasn't just a one-day seminar. It was an intensive program designed to teach officers how to handle tense situations without resorting to force. Role-playing exercises put them in scenarios where they had to think critically and communicate effectively. Some officers embraced the training, seeing it as a tool to improve their work and protect themselves from legal trouble. Others grumbled, arguing that it was impractical or unnecessary. "We're not social workers," one veteran officer muttered during a break. "How are we supposed to negotiate with someone waving a knife?" Despite the pushback, early results showed promise. Officers reported feeling more confident in high-pressure situations, and community members noticed subtle shifts in interactions with law enforcement. A mother recounted how an officer calmly talked her teenage son out of a confrontation instead of immediately reaching for handcuffs. "It made me realize they're trying," she said during a town hall meeting. "Not everyone's perfect, but at least they're making an effort." Another significant reform was the creation of an independent oversight board, comprised of community leaders, activists, legal experts, and even former law enforcement officers. The board was tasked with reviewing complaints against the police department. For years, residents had accused the department of sweeping misconduct, allegations under the rug. Now every complaint, no matter how small, was subject to external scrutiny. At first, some officers bristled at the idea of outsiders questioning their decisions. "They don't understand what we deal with on the streets," one patrol officer complained. But over time, many came to see the board as a safeguard rather than a threat. If nothing else, it forced them to be more mindful of their actions. The board didn't just investigate complaints. It also held public hearings where residents could share their experiences. These sessions were raw and unfiltered, offering a platform for voices that had long been ignored. One elderly woman tearfully recounted how officers had mistreated her grandson during a traffic stop. A young man described being stopped repeatedly while walking home from work, simply because he lived in a neighborhood labeled high risk. Each story added another layer to the complex relationship between the police and the community. For some officers, hearing these accounts was eye-opening. For others, it was uncomfortable, a reminder of the pain they'd caused, intentionally or not. While these changes began to take root, the legal battle against the detective who sparked the entire crisis reached its climax. His trial became a flashpoint for debates about accountability and systemic reform. Prosecutors argued that his actions represented a pattern of abuse within the department, while his defense team claimed he was being scapegoated for broader issues beyond his control. Testimonies from witnesses, experts, and even fellow officers painted a complicated picture. Some described him as hot-headed and reckless, while others insisted he was a product of a flawed system that failed to provide proper support and guidance. In the end, the jury found him guilty of assault and violating civil rights. The verdict sent shockwaves through Ridgeview. For supporters of reform, it was a victory, a sign that no one, not even a decorated officer, was above the law. For critics, it was bittersweet. Yes, justice had been served in this case, but what about the countless others who never saw their day in court? "This is just the beginning," the lawyer reminded the crowd gathered outside the courthouse after the verdict. "One conviction doesn't fix everything. We need to keep pushing for change." As the convicted detective was sentenced to prison, the focus shifted back to the larger mission, transforming Ridgeview's police department into an institution worthy of trust. The DOJ monitors remained in the city, ensuring that reforms were implemented fully and fairly. Their presence was both reassuring and intimidating. Officers knew they were being watched closely, which motivated some to adhere strictly to new policies. Others resented the constant oversight, feeling like they couldn't do their jobs without second-guessing every move. "It's like walking on eggshells," one rookie admitted. But maybe that's what we need right now. Community policing initiatives also gained momentum. Officers started attending block parties, school events, and local festivals, not as enforcers but as neighbors. These efforts weren't always smooth. Some residents still harbored deep resentment and refused to engage. Others welcomed the gesture but remained cautious, unsure if it was genuine or just for show. Still, small victories emerged. A group of kids playing basketball invited officers to join their game. A shop owner struck up a friendly conversation with a patrol officer who frequented his store. These moments may have seemed minor, but they planted seeds of connection that could grow over time. Behind the scenes, the new police captain worked tirelessly to address lingering challenges. She knew that implementing reforms was only half the battle. Sustaining them would require ongoing commitment. To that end, she introduced regular feedback sessions where officers and residents could discuss progress and air grievances. These meetings weren't always pleasant. Tensions flared, accusations flew, and old wounds reopened. But they also created opportunities for honest dialogue. We won't agree on everything, the captain told participants during one particularly heated session. But we can agree to listen to each other and work toward solutions. For the lawyer who had become a symbol of the movement, the journey was far from over. While he celebrated the progress made in Ridgeview, he remained acutely aware of the bigger picture. He traveled to other cities, sharing lessons learned and advocating for similar reforms nationwide. His message was simple, yet powerful. Real change requires courage, persistence, and collaboration. Back home, he continued working with local leaders to draft legislation aimed at preventing future abuses. It was slow, painstaking work, but he believed it was worth it. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, he often said. It's about creating systems that prevent it from happening in the first place. By the time the DOJ monitors prepared to leave Ridgeview, the city had changed in profound ways. Crime rates initially rose as inexperienced officers struggled to adapt to new protocols, but eventually stabilized as relationships improved. Trust between the police and the community was still fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing month. People began to see glimpses of hope. Officers mentoring students, residents volunteering at police-sponsored events, and collaborative efforts to tackle issues like homelessness and drug addiction. Yet challenges persisted. Not everyone welcomed the reforms, and skepticism lingered among certain factions. Some officers quietly resisted changes, while others openly criticized the direction the department was heading. Residents debated whether the reforms went far enough, or if more drastic measures were needed. Skeptics wondered if the progress would last once the spotlight faded. Could Ridgeview truly transform itself, or was this just a temporary fix? Even so, there was a sense that something important had shifted. For the first time in years, people dared to dream of a future where law enforcement truly served and protected all citizens equally. It wouldn't be easy, and setbacks were inevitable. But Ridgeview was learning to confront its flaws head-on, striving to create something stronger and more resilient. Because in the end, healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about building a bridge to a better tomorrow. Months turned into years, and Ridgeview slowly began to look like a different city. The scars of the past were still visible, on street corners where protests once erupted, in families who lost loved ones to misconduct, and in officers who struggled to adapt to new ways of doing their jobs. But there was also a sense that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about reforms or policies. It was about people learning to trust each other again, one small step at a time. The police department, once seen as an impenetrable fortress, started opening its doors wider. Community members were invited to tour the station, sit in on training sessions, and even participate in ride-alongs with officers. These experiences humanized both sides in ways no policy ever could. A mother who joined a patrol admitted she used to fear every interaction with law enforcement, but now understood the pressures officers faced daily. "It doesn't excuse bad behavior," she said during a town hall meeting, "but it helps me see them as people too." For some officers, these interactions changed how they approached their work. One rookie officer described how riding alongside a community leader helped him rethink his role. "I thought my job was to catch criminals," he explained, "but now I realize it's more about solving problems before they escalate." That mindset became a cornerstone of the department's new philosophy: prevention over punishment, connection over confrontation. Still, not everything went smoothly. There were setbacks, moments when old habits crept back in, or when tensions flared despite everyone's best efforts. In one instance, an officer mistakenly pulled over a teenager for no clear reason, sparking outrage online. Instead of brushing it off, the department issued a public apology and launched an internal review. The officer involved was reassigned to desk duty while undergoing additional sensitivity training. While some criticized the response as overly harsh, others saw it as proof that accountability was finally being taken seriously. The Independent Oversight Board played a crucial role in maintaining this balance. Over time, residents began to view the board not as an adversary to the police but as a partner in creating a fairer system. When complaints arose, and they did, the board handled them swiftly and transparently. Their reports included detailed explanations of findings and recommendations for improvement, which were shared publicly. This openness fostered a culture of honesty, however uncomfortable it sometimes felt. Meanwhile, the lawyer who had sparked so much of the change remained, deeply involved in shaping Ridgeview's future. He continued advocating for broader reforms beyond the city limits, traveling to speak at conferences and meet with lawmakers. But he never lost sight of Ridgeview itself. Every week, he held office hours where anyone could walk in and share their concerns. Some came seeking advice after negative encounters with law enforcement. Others wanted guidance on how to get involved in local activism. His door was always open, a symbol of unwavering commitment to justice. Yet, even he acknowledged that progress was fragile. During a speech at a community event marking the 3rd anniversary of the DOJ investigation, he reminded everyone of the stakes. "We've come a long way," he said, looking out at the crowd. "But we can't afford to grow complacent. Change isn't a destination, it's a journey. And if we stop walking, we risk sliding backward." His words resonated deeply because Ridgeview knew firsthand what happened when systems failed. The convicted detective remained in prison, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. For many, his case represented closure, but for others, it was a call to remain vigilant. Activists organized workshops teaching citizens how to document interactions with law enforcement, file complaints, and advocate for themselves. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and the importance of holding institutions accountable. These efforts ensured that the lessons of the past wouldn't be forgotten. Back at the police department, leadership continued evolving under the guidance of the reform-minded captain. She introduced mentorship programs pairing seasoned officers with rookies, emphasizing ethical decision-making and empathy. Officers participated in monthly forums where they could discuss challenges and brainstorm solutions together. Slowly but surely, the culture within the force began to shift, from one of isolation and defensiveness to one of collaboration and accountability. Crime rates fluctuated during this period, as they always do, but the overall trend was positive. Neighborhoods once plagued by violence saw reductions in incidents thanks to partnerships between law enforcement and community organizations. Blockwatch groups formed, businesses invested in security measures, and schools implemented conflict resolution programs. Residents took pride in reclaiming their streets, knowing they had played a part in making them safer. Of course, not everyone was satisfied. Critics argued that the reforms hadn't gone far enough, pointing to lingering disparities in how certain communities were policed. Others worried that increased oversight might discourage qualified candidates from joining the force. Skeptics questioned whether the changes would last once federal monitors left for good. "Real transformation takes generations," one activist cautioned. "We're planting seeds now, but it'll take years to see the full harvest." Despite these concerns, there was a growing sense of optimism. People talked openly about the future, not just surviving it, but thriving in it. A group of high school students launched a campaign to repaint murals around the city with messages of unity and resilience. Local artists collaborated on projects celebrating Ridgeview's diversity. Business owners organized festivals bringing together residents from all walks of life. The city buzzed with energy, a testament to what happens when people refuse to give up on each other. One of the most powerful moments came during Ridgeview's annual Unity Day celebration. Thousands gathered in the park where protests had once raged, now transformed into a vibrant space filled with music, food, and laughter. Officers mingled with families, sharing stories and smiles. A young boy handed out badges he'd made himself, calling them symbols of hope. An elderly woman stood at a microphone, her voice steady as she recounted decades of struggle and triumph. "We've been through hell," she said, "but we're still here, still fighting, still believing." As the sun set over Ridgeview, casting golden light across the crowd, it was impossible not to feel moved. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenges would undoubtedly arise. But for the first time in a long time, the city dared to dream of a brighter tomorrow. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building on it, a foundation of hard-won lessons and hard-fought victories. This final chapter of Ridgeview's story is one of resilience, redemption, and renewal. It captures the messy, imperfect process of healing and growth. It's a reminder that change is rarely linear, often painful, but always possible when people come together with courage and determination. Because in the end, it's not just about fixing broken systems. It's about rebuilding trust, one human connection at a time.